The James Show Podcast.
If you have never called a radio show before, this may be the first one, because there's been an undercurrent argument that you've had thrown in your face probably your entire life. You can't be a Republican and a Christian at the same time. Well, it's kind of morphed into this new mutant thing. Well, you can't be MAGA and Christian at the same time. And look, it's been there and you've heard it before, but this complaint has gone absolutely volcanic in the face of the big, beautiful bill, because, you know, if you're a Democrat, how do you argue against this bill? How do you say this is a bad bill? It continues almost all of the spending that y'all done for the last 4 years when your party had control of Congress and the White House. It doesn't make any drastic cuts. We're talking about $150 billion in cuts, most of that to USAID. And a couple of illegal immigrants are not going to get their food stamps. But it's not any giant cuts. In fact, there's more additional spending than cuts. So this is an increase in spending. This is a growth in the size of government. And you're getting, none of your principles are getting slashed over here unless you really wanted to have the tax rates go up at the end of the year. I mean, what is your complaint? Well, they got to find something to complain about. They can't say, well, Trump put through a bill that kind of aligns with our principles, so we better support it. No, they've got to come up with the reason. And the reason that the focus on this one is that people are going to die. People are going to suffer. You're slapping the foods out of little babies' mouths. And one angle of attack on this complaint just really rubs me the wrong way. And that's when they try and invoke religion. And they try and use your religious sensibilities against you or to make a political point. And I find this just so evil. And look, if you're not a believer, you're off the hook on this. You hold no account. But Christians who do this to other Christians, what's the matter with you? So one video that went viral over the weekend, millions of people have shared this out and seen it and discussed it. There's another one of these anti-MAGA preachers who's making the case here that you can't be Christian and MAGA at the same time. 800-288-9227 if you want to respond to this guy. I know this isn't important, like in the whole philosophical argument, but just so you know, this guy looks like exactly how he sounds. Looks like a little dweeb. Like he's 5'4", maybe 128 pounds. If he's going to do like bicep curls, he has to use like a pack of Twizzlers or something. That's all he can handle. Looks like he's never exercised a day in his life. It's exactly how he sounds. Just the most beta, weak little man you can find. And he's going to lecture you about being MAGA and Christian.
You know, I've been called an anti-MAGA preacher, and it's true. I am anti-MAGA. In fact, anyone who claims to be a Christian has to be anti-MAGA, or else you're not truly following the teachings of Jesus Christ. You cannot follow Jesus, who told us to welcome the stranger, while also advocating to close our borders to immigrants and refugees. You cannot follow Jesus, who told us to feed those who are hungry and give drink to those who are thirsty, while also advocating to cut programs that give food and drink to those who are hungry and thirsty. You cannot claim to follow Jesus, who went around and provided health care for free while also advocating for cuts to health care. You cannot claim to follow Jesus, who spent his entire life going around and teaching people while also cutting education. You cannot claim to follow Jesus, who spent his entire ministry giving hope to the poor while also advocating for an economic system that takes money from the poor and gives it to billionaires. Yes, I'm an anti-MAGA preacher because everything that claims to make America great again is bad for the kingdom of God, the reign of God on this earth. If you're a Christian, be anti-MAGA.
That's not a joke. That's not a parody. That's a real man saying words that I guess he believes that's true. And as far as I know, if it's a parody, you're supposed to mark it. And I've gotten it wrong before, but I think that's real. And so the first great piece of evidence we have that Jesus isn't a socialist or wasn't a socialist is that he actually fed people. I love that joke, because a lot of people who've looked into this for more than 5 seconds and don't believe everything they hear on TV, that that countries that lean real hard into socialism have a pretty strong pattern of starvation. They should write it into the textbooks. There's certain levels of socialism. There's like democratic socialism, and there's sort of like the Nordic model of socialism, or the UK before Margaret Thatcher, which was kind of like the halfway point. And then as you go down the spectrum, eventually you get to the level of socialism where people are starving, and then people break into the zoo to eat all the animals. animals. But when Jesus fed 5,000, was it from private voluntary donations? Or did he go get the Romans to tax people to make a government program and put these people on the dole and feed them that way? Is that what Jesus did? Because that's not what I remember. When he told the parable of the Good Samaritan found a guy who had been robbed and beaten on the side of the road, and he needed medical help. What'd the guy do? What did the Samaritan do? Well, he helped him. But he didn't say, stay put. I'm going to go get the Romans to pass a law forcing you to buy health insurance. That's not in my translation. Is that in the Septuagint? No, but we know Jesus isn't a socialist because he also actually taught people himself. When there was an education deficit that he noticed, he taught people himself. He instructed had the chat with the doctors and when they visited the temple when he was a kid. He instructed these other guys on how to go out and teach people in the way that he taught them. But what did he not do? He didn't go lobby the Romans to tax people to create the Ministry of Education or Department of Education or whatever Roman education equivalent would be. He didn't get government schools to teach people. He taught people. And so there's a dangerous conflation with supporting social programs being confused with actual charity, with actually supporting the poor and the sick and the uneducated. And the dangerous part of this charity argument, and the reason it works on some Christians, is there is an inherent emotional element that seems to turn people's brains off. So the accusation is that because you don't support these social programs, you want people to starve and die and be uneducated, or you want grandma on the street. Coming up, I'm gonna give you the great counter example of puppies to counter this claim that if you don't support all these social programs and you're not a good Christian. Boy, that is just really sick to try and use the name of God to support your own political cause like this. This is what they talk about with using the Lord's name in vain, invoking people's pre-existing love of Jesus to say, well, this is what Jesus would have done. He would have voted my way. Yikes. Huge red flag for me. Because the danger here is when they sort of associate supporting social programs with actual charity, with the charity that Jesus described and he displayed and he acted out. So I want to use a counter example. I mean, it's kind of emotional, but it's not as life and death, so you can kind of detach. Because everyone agrees that puppies are a good thing, and everyone agrees that children, if you want to have a child getting a puppy, it's a cute thing. You probably have an emotional connection to that. You probably enjoyed getting a puppy and having a puppy when you were a kid. But you do recognize that out in the real world, not everyone has the same access to puppies. Rich people can get expensive designer puppies. They can get like a Goldie Poo or whatever they're called. And regular people like me, I just go to the pound, I'll get a mutt, or someone will have a litter of puppies on a farm. Anyone want a free mutt? And aside from, the getting them fixed and getting some shots and maybe some flea medication, it's pretty much anyone can get a mutt for basically a trifling sum. I mean, maybe not everyone can afford it, but the bar is pretty low. But let's say someone noticed that not everyone gets all the puppies they want whenever they want. And so they started a federal program for puppies, a federal puppy program, promising better access to puppies, cheaper, faster, better quality. But here you fast forward 50 years, puppies are 100 times more expensive. The quality of puppies is drastically worse. And for many places, there's a puppy waiting list, and it's gotten so expensive that if you do need a puppy, you probably need insurance to afford it. And now the government's mandating that you buy puppy insurance, whether you plan on getting a puppy or not. So now if you showed back up 50 years later after the puppy program was started and said, hey, we should repeal all the government interventions into the puppy market, return the puppy industry to the private sector, are you taking away anyone's puppies? Are you taking away anyone's access to puppies? They like to use that term, access to healthcare, access to education, or access to food. Or do you recognize that people of all socioeconomic classes are about to get their puppies cheaper, faster, and of higher quality? Because once you recognize this, welcome to free market capitalism. Thank you. You just made an economic conclusion that I was walking you into. And this lesson works for all industries and all markets, including charity. Charity's an industry. Maybe Jesus not promoting government programs or social programs, maybe that's not an accident. Maybe he's right about economics too. What do you think? He's just some hack that forgot to mention we need food stamps? Did Jesus ever support any government program? It's been my observation, Jesus did not enjoy his experience being intertwined with government. So where does this put you? 800-288-9227. Can you be Christian and MAGA at the same time? This is Bobby in Irving. You're on WBAP. What do you think?
I think it's crazy if you go back to the old. And this is talking to a man that's like trying to overcome anger so I don't go to hell. I'm not a preacher, but I've read the Bible, and I know that we was never supposed to have a king or government or anything. If you know that in the Old Testament, we was never supposed to have a leader. God was supposed to be our leader. And just long story short, I'm blown away that we actually have people saying that God made a mistake. He made a girl by an accident, and he made that boy by accident. And man, flesh and blood has a right to change that. And that is the most blasphemy, horrible thing I've ever heard, to see these guys competing against girls. And if you agree with Donald Trump, who said lying Hillary, and forget the name who he called out. He says they're liars. They're evil. So I guess we're supposed to accept evil, accept lies, and then speak blasphemy that the Creator, that I'm praying to every day just to get over my anger and get over my bad attitude. But now I'm all confused. I don't know. I was actually calling to get some help from you. Like, does God make mistakes? Did he actually? He accidentally made a boy, and he's supposed to. This is insane. And as far as the expensive puppies go, you got to put doodle at the end of it. If it's labradoodle, whatever doodle, it's real expensive.
Yeah, you know what? Thank you very much. That would have been a better reference than the one I used. What I say, Goldie Poo or whatever. But well, I wouldn't say God made mistakes, but he does have factory seconds. You know, there are people out there who are born with some sort of shortcoming. You know, like one leg or whatever. But it's all part of the plan. It has nothing to do with social programs. It has nothing to do with whether or not we need to cut SNAP benefits. I mean, are we really? Look at the poorest among us and their relationship with food. It used to be, 150, all of human history till about 100 years ago. If you were the poorest among us and we had a food shortage, you would starve. Some of you would starve and die. It hadn't happened. Now the poorest among us are fatter than the people paying the taxes that cover their food stamps. Now their biggest problem is diabetes. They're getting too many calories too fast. So what, giving them more access to cheaper free snacks, is that really helping them? This is Shirley in Alliance on WBAP. Hey, Shirley.
Hey, I have a little different point of view maybe than this pastor does. And being a marketer for the largest Christian publisher in the world for 10 years, I can't even have time to go through the scripture with him. But anyway, here's something that happened during COVID which exacerbated this issue. About 35% of our young people, millennials, childbearing, from about ages 18 to 35, moved back home. That's what they did. They moved, all right? They haven't moved out yet. Guess what happened when they moved back home? By the millions, and not an exaggeration, by the millions, they left their kids with grandparents, with sisters, with uncles, whoever they left them with. And guess where those food stamps are going? Not to those addresses. That's not where they go.
Oh, this is a food stamp thing.
Benefits for children. These people collect benefits for children who are not in their possession.
Yeah.
And they're doing it by the millions. And grandparents can't do anything about it. So, we talk about, he wants to protect people. He doesn't want to protect children if he's not willing to find the fraud in this system, because it is just exorbitant. It is amazing what is out there. And people are left helpless to it. But he doesn't care about that, does he?
Well, no, I like the fact that you're going at that angle, because I've always felt that charity being in the realm of government has sort of broken us in ways that most of us don't even recognize, because that's been the norm for our entire life. For my entire life, food stamps has existed, Medicare, Medicaid. Now, that's not the case for my parents. My parents are older than Medicare and food stamps. Right. And when they were born, did we have children that were just starving in the streets and dying? Were old people just homeless, living under bridges? No, actually, when you go back and you look at how we have disrupted society by offloading charity, our personal responsibility to be charitable, as Jesus described, into the hands of government, that we've taken part of our soul away, because there's something that is sort of therapeutic, I should say, to your soul when you actually do acts of charity. And I don't mean acts of charity where you get credit for it or anything. It's sort of that anonymous thing that if you haven't done it, go do it and see if you feel a little bit different afterwards. I bet you're not as depressed. I bet you don't feel useless after that when poor or disabled or otherwise people depend on you.
I tell you what I do feel, when you get to know enough people and you do enough reading on the subject, you begin to realize we've almost trained a middle class to use charity. We're training the tech savvy to use it for sure. They're very smart. and some of these millennials especially, very smart, and they know how to access these charitable things, and they feel nothing about it. There are tons of social studies written on this and political studies telling us that when things come out of a main pool and you and I collect from it, we do not feel anything about it. In fact, what we feel is that if we don't take it, someone else will get it, and why should I have it? That is the political science theory behind that's what we think.
Well, and that's one of the great descriptions of economics isn't really a study of money or a study of numbers. It's more a study of human behavior. Thank you very much, Shirley in Alliance. Coming up next, this sort of same strain of thought showed up on the Joe Rogan podcast where he had Bono, lead singer of U2, was on last Thursday or Friday, and they were talking about some cuts made to USAID on the claims that it's going to kill 300,000 people. Let's talk about that coming up next. Do you think charity should be the purview of government, or should we just cut all this and turn it back over to the private sector? Can you be a Christian and MAGA at the same time? I think it's absurd to make that claim. 800-288-9227. Because this is coming up not only from the big, beautiful bill, but in the cuts to USAID. A report came out that said 300,000 people have already died from the USAID cuts. And I thought that was interesting. We're now responsible for everyone that's going hungry on planet Earth. And not only are we responsible for it, we have to do it through government. We couldn't do it through private voluntary donations. What about other countries? What about China? They don't have to pick up the slack. What about Russia? What about the UK? What about the country themselves? They're not responsible for feeding themselves. They don't have steps that they can take like within their own borders to make sure that they have enough food. How come all these other countries can do it, but they can't? What's going on there? And I always find this insidious, this idea that if you're not for the government version, the socialized edition of charity, then you're not for charity, period. But here it is. It raised its head with the anti-MAGA preacher, but it also raised its head on the Joe Rogan podcast last week because Bono, lead singer of U2, was on making the case here. And, he's committed a chunk of his life to helping out poor people in Africa and whatnot. But here he was last week making a similar case.
Just recent report. It's not proven, but the surveillance enough suggests 300,000 people have already died from just this cut off, this hard cut of USAID. So there's food rotting in boats, in warehouses. You will not be happy. No American will, but there is, I think it's 50,000 tons of food that are stored in Djibouti, South Africa, Dubai, and wait for it, Houston, Texas. And that is rotting rather than going to Gaza, rather than going to Sudan, because the people who know the codes or for the warehouse are fired. They're gone. And so this, I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I'll tell you what I think. First off, that's not believable that there's food rotting in a warehouse in Houston because the guy who knows the code to get in got fired, and now it's just going to rot in there. We have no way of getting all the locksmith have just vanished, been raptured up to Jesus or something. No one knows how to open a door or poke a hole in a wall. It's just the food's going to sit in there. So that's not a believable scenario. Let's not make fun of him for that. I mean, the general thrust of his argument, we still need to address. Even if it is true, which is probably not true. 300,000 people have already died from USAID cuts. You mean there are people on the other side of the planet whose life is dependent on government taking money from you and giving it to them? Now, how long is this supposed to last? Did you adopt them? I didn't know I had dependents on the other side of the planet. I have a hard enough time paying for myself, Miss Parker, and our 4 children. Thank you very much. Is anyone going to send me some food or a check or something? No, all the air quotes charity just goes one way. I don't find that believable. And I know where the lie comes from. They're going to say that they were providing X amount of meals, which is keeping X amount of people alive. And then you cut that and they're just going to die. No, they're probably still going to get some food. They're probably going to take some money that they were spending elsewhere or some effort, some activity, and put that productive activity towards food. In fact, I'm not sure if anybody's going to die from famine. It's been a long time, pretty much depending on how old you are. For your entire life, the world has made more food than the people need to eat to stay alive. We produce far more calories than it takes to stay alive. So really, once we got rid of the mass spread of communism and Marxism in the 80s and early 90s, famines are a thing of the past. Famines are like, if you have starving people, a lot of that is just from people who have access to food and someone is stopping them from getting it. So, and it's not you, it's not me. There's plenty of food aid to go around. There's plenty of charity to go around. There's plenty of good people on planet Earth who give privately, voluntarily, the more important part, to feed all the people. There's usually some corrupt government that's stopping it or that intercepts the U.S. aid packages and then sells them off and keeps the money. And so I contend with the fact, Bono, that if you cut off the free food coming from the American taxpayers, that these people are just going to naturally die. And if there is still a need for the U.S. citizens to put forward resources to make sure people on the other side of the planet don't die, then we're just going to have to do it from private voluntary donations. We're not going to have to do it through USAID anymore. Joe Rogan kind of pushed back, but in a way I thought it was a little inadequate. Listen to Rogan's response here.
We help the world. And when you're talking about making wells for people in the Congo to get fresh water, when you talk about food and medicine to places that don't have access, like, no way that should have been cut out. And that should have been clear before they make these radical cuts. Like, there's got to be a way to keep aid and not have fraud. And you can't say we're going to kill everything so that there's no fraud. But then you're killing all the good, and you're doing it without letting anybody know it's going to happen. So it's not like they had 3 years to prepare. Let's build a new infrastructure. Let's make sure that everything's set up.
So now we're going to loop back into religion, because when we talk about how do we take care of these people who are in the third world, who do need food, they do need medical care, they do need to be educated. Well, when I talk about doing it through private voluntary donations, we're going to go back to 2014. And the Time Person of the Year, in 2014 was the Ebola doctors. If you look on the cover of it, 2014 Person of the Year, the Ebola fighters. Now, who are the Ebola fighters? Were they government bureaucrats? Were they doctors who were paid through USAID or some other government program? No, actually, it was a lot of people from Doctors Without Borders and Samaritan's Purse. The crazy part is Samaritan's Purse didn't get a whole lot of glow up from this. Christianity didn't get credit for this. Time didn't think it fit the narrative, so it was barely mentioned that it was Samaritan's Purse, and Samaritan's Purse was never identified as a Christian charity group. So really, the Person of the Year in 2014, the people who voluntarily took time and resources to go to the most dangerous part of the world where there's an Ebola outbreak and help the people who didn't have any money, didn't have any resources to compensate them with. It was all done through private voluntary donations. It was all done through private voluntary donations of doctors' times and resources of congregations from around the Christian world, not just America. Christians did that. And your Time Person of the Year should have been the Christian doctors and the Christian congregations that supported them and provided the resources. But when we have the blinding bias of the media narrative, the rest of the world doesn't get it. This is how you help people. This is how you more efficiently and more effectively help people in the third world if they need it, when they need it. And it just sprung up. Doctors went over there. We raised money for it. The problem was solved, and then it went away. If it was a government program, that problem would still be happening now. It would probably be even worse. There would be no incentive for Ebola to be cured. In fact, they would want Ebola to expand as much as possible so we can keep this gravy train rolling. But we didn't learn the lesson, primarily because the media just lied to your face, and they didn't want to give you credit. They didn't want to give Jesus credit. They didn't want to give Christians credit, because it makes their narrative look stupid. It makes their statish dreams look stupid. It makes USA look stupid. It makes government programs, health and human services, the VA look absolutely comical compared to how well private sector charity works, how well people acting out of their own Christian love for their fellow man actually worked better. Yeah, USA should be cut. All of it should be cut. SNAP should be cut. Public housing should be cut. Social Security, all this. Socialism fails, even in charity. When will we learn that lesson? We started off talking about this guy who calls himself an anti-MAGA preacher who was making the case that you can't be MAGA and a good Christian at the same time? Because, all of these cuts to poor people and food stamps and programs. And
I'm an anti-MAGA preacher because everything that claims to make America great again is bad for the kingdom of God, the reign of God on this earth. If you're a Christian, be anti-MAGA.
Yeah, it feels kind of icky when you mix politics in the pulpit like that, but he's out there saying it. And I was pushing back across this narrative that you've probably heard 1,000 times in your life, and it's real obvious. Jesus wasn't a socialist. He actually fed people. I mean, I love that joke. But never in the synoptic gospels did he call for a government program to help the poor. He said, you help the poor. He didn't call for the Good Samaritan to go pass a law to make sure the guy who got beaten and robbed and left on the side of the road to force him to buy health insurance. He actually gave him health care. He did private voluntary donations when he fed the 5,000. Private voluntary donations, not a government program. He didn't pass out food stamps at the Sermon of the Mount or in Capernaum or wherever the heck else he was feeding people and whatnot. This shows up, though, in other instances that aren't explicitly religious. I was bringing the cut from Bono, the lead singer of U2, on Joe Rogan last week. USAID cuts, killing people. Same idea.
Recent report. It's not proven, but their surveillance enough suggests 300,000 people have already died from just this cut off, this hard cut.
So you get it. It doesn't have like the religious connotation, but the same idea. Well, if we don't help these people through forced government programs, then people are going to die, and that's not good, or that's not Christian, or you're evil if you don't support this. You're a bad person. Look, the moral grandstanding is always icky from the political realm. But the study Bono's referencing, we know where that comes from. That number comes from Boston University. Had a study that was led by some lady named Brooke Nichols, but it's not based on hard data. She didn't go say, well, here's some excess deaths in the areas where USAID got cut off. She was just making a predictive model. Well, if we're sending this much money to this amount of people and it's feeding this many people and then we cut them off, then this many people are going to die. It's just a guess. It's a bogus number completely. We have no evidence that anyone has died from a USAID cut. There's some people theorizing that it could have been happening. But I don't completely dismiss Bono. I don't think he's a very bright guy when it comes to economics or world affairs in many settings. But he has been right before. He's a guy that's gone down to Africa and other third world countries and tried to use his fortune. He's actually donated quite a bit of his money from what I've read and tried and actually spent time down there and tried to understand it. And over the years, you get these little sound bites that kind of leak out, and he showed a little bit of promise there. Let's go to back to 2013. This is August 13th, 2013. Bono had to make a really hard admission that what helps the poor more than foreign aid is capitalism. Yes, Bono said this in 2013.
Rockstar preaches capitalism. Wow. Sometimes I hear myself and I just can't believe it. But commerce is real. That's what you're about here. It's real. Aid is just a stopgap. Commerce, entrepreneurial capitalism takes more people out of poverty than aid. Of course, we know that.
But yet here he is, 12 years later, saying cutting off aid is what's really hurting these people. What happened, Bono? Did you forget about that press conference? I didn't. Here he is in 2019. And he's not saying capitalism is good. I don't want to, go too far into the blasphemous territory of Team Blue here. He's not going to say it's not immoral, but it is amoral. Okay, I can kind of get with that. Here he is in 2019.
Capitalism is not immoral. It's amoral. It requires our instruction. Capitalism has taken more people out of poverty than any other ism, but it is a wild beast, and if not tamed, it can chew up a lot of people along the way.
Yeah, but see, it's different because, I don't know, Trump is Hitler? How do they forget these lessons when it came out of his own mouth? You know what we really need over here to fix our education system? Bono's right. Capitalism. We don't need another government program. We don't need an expansion of existing public schools. We could start with school vouchers, but I'd rather scrap the whole damn thing.
The James Show Podcast. The James Show Podcast.
Well, now that we've shaken the dust off of a couple of drone attacks, there was a big attack that Russia did against Ukraine, and then you probably heard a little bit more about the big drone attack Ukraine did against Russia. Is this going to be an inflection point that turns us toward peace, or is this going to be an inflection point that turns us toward escalation, or is this not going to be an inflection point at all? My next guest is going to have some insights in that. My next guest, the great David Hamilton with the National Security and Economic Center at UNT. Welcome back to the James Show. You're our foreign affairs analyst here. Do you think this attack is going to be something that we remember in a year from now?
I think it's very meaningful. There were a couple of things that happened during this war that were turning points. One, early on, there was sort of a Red Dawn moment where a bunch of young kids with some snipers on ATVs and drones stopped the column of tanks coming through Belarus. And had that not happened, I think Russia would have taken over like many people thought. But they mired them down on a skinny road with a whole bunch of tanks, and they couldn't move. So that was a really pivotal point early on. Getting Starlink in there and having communications, that was critical. But the innovations that have come around in warfare with asymmetric warfare that we're seeing, this is a prime example. 117 drones go to 4 different places in Russia, as far north as the Luhansk area, the far northwest to Siberia, and they took out millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars worth of equipment using trucks and drones inside those trucks.
Well, I think a lot of us are wowed because you can take out someone's Air Force without having to have an Air Force of your own.
Yep, the world changed, and asymmetric warfare is much different now. The coordination that it took was really impressive with the trucks getting there, et cetera, and then being able to open them up and then having them attack. But there's videos of these drones doing their work, and we see this with tanks. But if you take out an AWAC, that's far more expensive than a tank. And if you take out a transcontinental bomber capable of shooting 22 cruise missiles, that's an even bigger David and Goliath moment.
What's an AWAC?
It's their surveillance radar planes that provide reconnaissance and
spy planes.
Tactical advantage. Spy planes, yeah. And those are expensive. So they took out 4 different kinds of planes, 40 plus of them using drones, and their success rate, they destroyed probably 1/3 of the Russia's capability with those kinds of planes. This is a good day for Zelensky and his team, and I do hope that it's a reflection point for the Russians, because they have been very unwilling to negotiate, and they're negotiating from extreme positions, and they are attacking while they're in the middle of negotiations.
We're talking with David Hamilton, National Security Economic Center at UNT. I see both sides of the argument here where this could escalate things where Putin's going to be mad and he's going to do an even bigger counterattack. Or this could, the other argument is this could really affect the cost-benefit analysis of him continuing the war and bring him to the peace table. Which one do you think is the more likely scenario, David?
I'm very positive about this, and I could be a doom and gloom dire guy. I was worried more about the Germans and others providing Ukraine long-term, long-range attack capabilities that might actually damage civilian areas, hit Moscow and things like that, and that would have escalated things. But here we are taking up military assets. This is military on military, and it's degrading Russia's ability to put forward their war effort. So of how the Ukrainians could have gone about doing this was the best approach. They're prosecuting the war in a way that has the least likelihood, in my opinion, of escalating this into a World War III issue, because Russia is not in danger here. They're just not able to execute and prosecute their war the way they'd like to.
Well, I think a couple of observers should be concerned. Number one, how do you think China feels about this?
China has been using Russia as a surrogate, a puppet, to do what it wants to do and isn't willing to do itself.
Just to antagonize the West?
Antagonize the West, degrade our capabilities, distract us, because they are very interested in taking over the South China Sea. And they have imperialistic views on, they'd actually like to go all the way down to Australia, as their documents show. So they've been using this to distract us and to cause foment and discord within our own country, which is working. And I've said many, many times, we have to settle this war. We have to figure out a way for at least to be neutral with Russia. If they were an actual ally and did business with us, and we joined forces against our true mutual enemy, China, the world would be a much more stable place. And I think if Russia finally gets the sense that it's not going to be able to keep all of the territory that it's taken, it's going to have to withdraw, and there is a carrot for them, which is trade, we could end up in a world where America and Russia are not fighting each other through Ukraine, and we are all aligned against the one country in the world that really does want to take it over, which is China.
Well, also, my concern here is that there's some entities that are quite antagonistic toward the well-being of the United States, not just China, but like in Iran, or even smaller actors like terrorist groups. At some point, are they going to embrace or at least test out this drone technology? I mean, 9/11 is not going to happen again. They're not going to hijack any more planes and fly them into buildings. But are we going to have a terror attack with a drone swarm coming at us eventually?
This is absolutely the biggest concern. Imagine trucks like that coming somehow across the Canadian border, coming across on a tanker. We're able to do this sort of thing and attack downtown New York City or some other, the Super Bowl. And 100 drones hit the Super Bowl at one time. This is something we're going to have to be aware of and have countermeasures for. And this is a new arms race. This is a smaller, more nimble, cheaper arms race that is very, very hard to stop.
All right. Well, thanks for the heartburn there. This is David Hamilton from the National Security and Economic Center at UNT. Appreciate it, sir.
Thank you, sir.
The James Show Podcast.